Well, my friends, welcome to Chat at Catch. Hello and welcome to the Light Review, and we're here in Weymouth at Catch at the Old Fish Market, where we're looking forward to a whole new series of live face-to-face podcasts. We're away from our desks and we're away from our Zoom calls, so we hope you enjoy what we're able to offer you. Let's go and see what's inside. Welcome to Chat at Catch. We're at Catch at the Old Fish Market in Weymouth, and my name's John Bullock, and I'm joined today by Dr Shelley James, which can only mean that we're going to be talking about circadian lighting, because that, after all, is what Shelley is best known for. Shelley.
Hi. It's great
Hello.
to be here.
Right. We all thought we knew what circadian lighting meant. We'd got the idea of melanopic lux, of the 460, 480 nanometer peak, the idea that we needed blue rich, that it was going to wake everybody up, and that was going to be great. But you and I have been lucky enough to be working on a live project, access to the Oxford Circadian Neuroscience team with Professor Russell Foster, of course, and we now know that we've been missing some of the important stuff. Can we run through that? Where do you think the changes have come?
So, yes, there's been a big change. It was exciting to hear that directly from Russell. I think that the basic principles are still the same, but it's the nuance that's interesting. So we know that what we can see now is the contribution of the visual system, the rods and cones, is much greater than we previously thought. We thought that those two systems running almost separately. I mean, we know that the IPRGCs are a relay station for the rods and cones, but we thought that that independent response was really the only thing that mattered with that blue peak. And now we know that particularly the cones, short wavelength cones, are actually contributing quite a lot. We also know that although we did think that there were, within those 5 different types of, within the 5% IPRDCs, that they were all pretty much the same, it turns out that within that, there are some really interesting differences as well in terms of the way they're responding, how fast they're responding, and what they're responding to. So the first thing is that the basket of wavelengths that's triggering that non-visual system is more complicated and more interesting than we thought. And I think the other thing is that we were measuring melanopic response, well, melanopsin signaling or suppression, as a marker for sleep. And it turns out that now looking at people who don't generate melatonin naturally, it's actually being generated by lots of other bits of the body as well. So people who don't generate melatonin naturally, they still have a sleep-wake cycle. So the use of melatonin as the sleep signal is no longer, that's no longer a useful way to think about it.
So here we are in an industry where certainty is all. If I do this, that will happen. And now with if you like, the carpet has been pulled in a way. And if we're lucky, we're still standing when the carpet's gone. And I suppose in a way, the idea that the rods and the cones were not having anything to do with how we felt, whether we felt awake or whether we felt dozy, because that visual signalling has always been there.
It absolutely has, and I think that it was the industry's desire to kind of find a single knob to twist that led us down that blue peak, kind of blue being the only wavelength that counts system. I think the other thing that we we may have got lulled into a particular route with is this idea, but that the sleep-wake cycle is the only thing that matters. And we now know that the signaling pathway goes to a cluster of different systems. So we've got the alerting, we've got mood, and actually some of them are very rapid. So I think that idea about the sleep cycle being the only thing that counted as something that so that the industry's been keen to find a single knob to push, and the carpet is still there, but it's a much more interesting carpet than we thought.
It is, isn't it? You used the word mood. When we last met with Russell, he, for the first time I think I've ever heard him say psychology.
I know.
Which is quite spooky for a scientist, I think. That it's what we see, and as well as the mechanics of actually being able to see it, which brings us to that basic thing about how much. Are we now back to a place where we are talking about how much light we need to be able to do the visual signaling as well as the melanopic content that is looking after the IPRGCs?
Yes, I mean we're now back to you can't separate the visual and the non-visual. That's one, because one is a relay station for the others. So we can't ignore that. I think we are also back to a system where we're saying that even though, for example, in the care home we're working with the warm light in the evening, the extremely warm light, if you think about it in terms of melanopic lux, it shouldn't matter. Mm. You should be able to it should be the number of calories, not the way the calories are delivered, that matter. And yet it turns out that there is a kind of associative emotional dimension to warmer looking light, which isn't completely explained by the numbers on the packet. And I think the other thing that Russell mentioned was that your melanopic system, your non-visual system, is a photon counter. It counts up the calories or the photons across the day, and that it charges it up slowly and then releases it at night. So
back in the day, I'm going back now to 2016, where I first met Russell, and he was on a stage at Lux Live, and it was like, well, how much light do we need, Russell? And it was at that point where it was 1,000 lux for an hour or two, because we were only thinking about office workers. It was a daytime thing. It was people who weren't getting circadian entrainment on their way to work. How realistic that was, as opposed to the quality of light once you got to work, neither here nor there. But that now changes, as you say, the photon counter, whether it's 1,000 lux in an hour or whether it's 1,000 lux over 4 hours, presumably they're counting the same photons in whatever way they do it. So it's a much more gentle process. We've worried about the 1,000 lux. Do we really need to be achieving this? I mean, that's got energy implications. It's got capital cost implications in terms of how much equipment you need to deliver that level of light. But if we're still able to deliver what's needed at 300, 400, wherever we are, let's face it, the new office requirements starts at 500 lux anyway, at least at task, that it gives us a better option, I think, in terms of the way that we look at the way the light is being delivered, that we can still be talking about circadian entrainment at ordinary lighting levels over time.
Agreed.
Yeah?
At ordinary lighting levels over time, acknowledging though that the blue part of the spectrum, cooler lights, do have they're more potent to that non-visual system. So we're not throwing the blue baby out with the bathwater. What we're saying is that it's a basket of wavelengths that counts. And some of the work about sunlight or sort of broader spectrum lights does seem to have a really interesting effect on sleep as well. So just hammering away with the blue is not necessarily the point. And yes, having a longer exposure to much more comfortable levels and much more sustainable levels does seem to be something that we can look at now.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting conversations over the year is the one where we turned around to our client and we said, we don't need to be delivering daylight. We don't need 6,500 Kelvin, because if we're looking at the full spectrum type of product, we can get to the melanopic lux another way. Only to be told, no, we want the 6,500 Kelvin because of the way that people react to it, which is suggesting that it's a mood issue, it's an emotional issue, it's a psychological issue. One of those immeasurables. And all we can do is look around and go, are you happy? Oh, I feel great. I'll knock that one down then.
Agreed. And I think the other thing that we look at is this idea about dynamic lighting. So if you were in a space which changes over time, and where we know that if you get light in the morning, you are more resilient to evening light, for example. So it's to do with the contrast in light levels between the morning, the evening and the nighttime that also makes a big difference.
We mustn't ignore the nighttime.
Agreed.
I mean, so far we've gone down the conventional daytime circadian entrainment route, and we know where we are with that. But the other side of that is the sleepy side. It is the, as you say, we don't want any melanopic lux as we get into the evening. And that's a new thing. Now again, if we're only talking about the commercial world, no one's going to care, because as has been said to me in the past, that's not our problem. People go home. It's their problem. But if we take on a 24-hour engagement, when it does become our problem, that does raise an issue around how we deliver non-melanopic lux, zero melanopic lux, not non-melanopic. You know what I'm saying. And I think that's an important thing to that. Is that something that has surprised you in terms of the way that Russell has been describing that?
No, but what I find difficult, as you say, is the lighting industry. They're all about selling lights, and not necessarily about worrying about what happens in the evening. And the Well, for example, they're just bringing out their domestic standards and looking at things like window coverings, reducing light pollution, reducing energy use at night. And actually, if you take away some of that evening light, you can use some of that energy during the day. So it could be a big win-win-win. But the lighting industry tends to focus on bright light during the day. And one of the things that came up in that conversation was to do with shift work and people who work at night. And actually, offices, there are lots of people who work at night. So that's something else to consider.
Apart from the simple truth is that in a perfect world, no one would be working at night. And we're not in a perfect world, and far from it. And we haven't really got an answer, have we? We've got this is the best practice we can offer you.
You're right, we haven't got an answer. I mean, there are a couple of things to mention in this debate. One of them is that it turns out that some people are much more resilient, much more flexible than others, in the same way that some people are much more sensitive to spicy food. So there's that, and your chronotype makes a big difference to how you respond to changes in your day-night time. The other thing is that something that's come through in the literature I've been reading is that the real problem is messing it up all the time. So if you have a stable shift, even if it means working nights all the time, that's actually some body clocks can adapt to that quite well. And the third thing that's come through is that for some, it depends on the type of task you're doing. And what was interesting talking to the Danes that were there in the meeting that we had the other day was that if the care home environment and the environment is calm and peaceful, keeping people in a state of relaxed awakeness using softer light is absolutely fine. So what they found is they actually sleep better when they get home too. Equally, when I've seen stuff on people in control rooms, they need to be awake. And so pumping them up with blue light, truck drivers, pumping them up with blue light, it works. We know it reduces error rates, it improves response times. So it's to do with delivering the light that people need to do the task they want to do.
So are we suggesting that people need to be matched to jobs with a view to their chronotype?
Potentially. It does have interesting ethical and sort of practical implications. That's some of the work that I've been reading.
Well, that's the one for the HR department then, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Good grief. Okay. I I think to finish off this little conversation, the one thing that we've come to understand is that the answers do not come out of a box. It has to be system design. We're now actually talking about whether we should be interviewing staff to make sure they're in the right job at the right time, and what happens if they're not. And our clients and our potential clients have got an awful lot more on the table to work with.
They have.
It's not one standard answer. It's an answer that will be determined by their architecture, their practices, what they're trying to achieve, and that will come through good system design.
Agreed. And I think the other thing to mention is that, as we said, nighttime is important. In the same way as delivering any environment, you need to, number one, get as much natural daylight as you can, and number two, help make sure that the staff understand why these things matter. So not only why it matters to get people close to the windows or outside if they can during the day, but also not to mess with the buttons in the evening and to let people rest quietly at night. So it's to do with delivering an overall environment rather than the lights themselves.
And overall understanding of the process.
Yes.
For everyone.
And why it matters.
And why it matters. Dr. Shelley James, thank you very much. That's been a great session on where the changes have come from. This conversation will continue.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.